leaning a little bit too much towards the suppression of conservative viewpoints.
Okay. And I think we still, as has been the subject of conversation a lot here recently, we do need to make a distinction, don't we, between hate speech and freedom of expression.
Let's try and define that today.
We've done so well.
We raised this issue yesterday, the extent to which you should be punished for what you did at school as a teen, except that in the big American case of this right now, the perpetrator completely denies the accusation, and at stake is his becoming a Supreme Court judge, and his accuser is a professor of psychology. So in the latest development, more than 200 women who attended the same all-girls school as Professor Christine Ford have signed an open letter supporting her allegations of sexual assault when she and Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh were both at high school. But none of these women was a witness. The only witness says it never happened, and Brett Kavanaugh says nothing faintly resembling that incident has ever happened in his life. And the women base this on inductive reasoning, if you like, because such assaults are very familiar to them or have happened to them. And how on earth, Jonathan, from a distance, is guilt going to be established here?
Well, it can't be, frankly, and I'm a great fan of work that's being done through Otago University, looking at establishing some sort of limitation period for some of these crimes. For instance, minor crimes have a 6-month limitation period if you haven't reported or if it hasn't been prosecuted, should I say, within 6 months if it's allegedly been committed, then it can't be. Some of these historic things are very, very difficult, and in this particular instance, because the stakes are so very high for the nominee, the slightest whiff of any sort of anything like this is going to destroy him, isn't it?
Can I just speak to that point though?
Which one?
Well, the point about there being a statute of limitations on things like this. So, I know very, very, very many women who have never made a complaint against their abuser.
Yeah.
And they don't do that for very many reasons. But I think it's entirely understandable if when you saw your abuser, rapist, whatever, about to be made extremely powerful, put into an extremely powerful position, that might be the moment that you felt compelled to do something about it. I fully support and understand that.
Yes.
I do too. I was talking about a limitation for prosecution, not necessarily for what's going on. But the question Jim asked me was, how on earth could you prove it? And I think we probably can't, and that led me to speak about the limitation period.
And I was really making the point that I'm sure is a familiar story for these women, but of course that doesn't necessarily guarantee it's true for them anyway.
Well, absolutely.
No, it doesn't. And as we know, there are in a very, very small, rare minority of cases false complaints. So, but I don't think that means you necessarily can dismiss what's being said.
No, but it is a fascinating situation, isn't it?
It really is.
And with, as Jonathan says, an awful lot at stake. Someone says, have you forgotten that Dunedin exists and has an international airport? I'm very sorry to have left Dunedin off the discussion of airports this afternoon.
Not quite as close to Queenstown as Invercargill, though, is it?
No, and I wonder... No, it's not. I'm not sure which the better drive would be. Jonathan Krebs, enjoy your time in Christchurch. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Only another hour here, and I'm off for sunny Hawke's Bay. It's been a pleasure this afternoon. Thank you.
Paula Penfold has been our other guest. Thank you so much, Paula.
Pleasure to be here. Good to hear you too, JK.
And the panel is back tomorrow. Thanks for your company, everybody. And now here's Checkpoint.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe, ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. Great to be joining you. On tonight's program, the Prime Minister comes under fire in Parliament after fumbling an interview this morning about GDP figures. Heartbreaking scenes as Australian strawberry growers dump thousands of tonnes of fruit as the needle sabotage scandal spreads nationwide. An Auckland businessman and community board chairman is sentenced to 4 years in prison for sexually exploiting children. Oxfam accuses 4 multinational drug companies of avoiding millions of dollars worth of New Zealand taxes every year. The death toll from Tropical Cyclone Florence has now risen to 25. We'll have more on that. And of course, we have the winners and losers from the Emmys all coming up on Checkpoint after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. A former JP has been told that voyeurs like him keep the trade in child sexual abuse going. In the High Court in Auckland today, Martin Henry Laws was jailed for 4.5 years for paying Filipino parents to sexually abuse their children on the internet while he watched from his North Shore home. Justice Wiley said the 75-year-old gave directions about he wanted to see.
But for anonymous voyeurs prepared to pay for such services, the trade of dealing in young people and vulnerable children for exploitation would not exist. It makes no difference to the child victims that they were being abused at the direction of a faceless and unknown person in a faraway country. They were still being abused.
Justice Wiley, Law's youngest victim was 3. The Department of Conservation is investigating the deaths of 8 cattle after a 1080 pest control operation in and around the Waikato Wildlife Reserve 2 weeks ago. The animals appear to have got through a fence and into the area where the poison was dropped. DOC says it's working with the landowner to find out how this happened. It says it saw the cattle in the area 2 weeks before the drop and advised the farmer to remove them. The department says a review of the exercise shows the drop went according to plan and is agreed with all the landowners adjacent to the Mapara Wildlife Reserve. A court has been told Dame Jenny Shipley and other Mainzeal directors should have known it wouldn't be able to recoup $33 million in loans. Mainzeal, which collapsed while owing creditors $117 million, is being sued for $75 million. Prosecutor Mark O'Brien told the High Court in Auckland today it gave millions of dollars in loans to the shell company MLG. Dame Jenny was a director of both companies, and Mr O'Brien said she and other directors should have known the loans couldn't be repaid and that Mainzeal was in trouble.
Despite these unresolved issues, and they were, and despite the precarious financial position, and it was because for no other reason than PwC had identified it, the directors allowed the company to continue.
Prosecutor Mark O'Brien. The Speaker has told the government to front up with personal emails between the former Minister Claire Curran and the technology entrepreneur Derek Handley. As Minister, Ms Curran used personal emails and didn't properly record a meeting with Mr Handley, who was applying for the job of Chief Technology Officer. The National MP, Nick Smith, has repeatedly asked the State Services Minister, Chris Hipkins, how many emails there were between Ms Curran and Mr Handley and the contents of them. Trevor Mallard says it would be good for transparency if Mr Hipkins brought the emails to the House.
Then it should not be beyond the wit of the various people within the State Services Commission to sort out the relevant emails and to have them available for a fuller and more transparent explanation in the House tomorrow.
The Speaker, Trevor Mallard. Australia's strawberry scare has now reached across the country, with the police in Western Australia reporting the state's first case of suspected needle sabotage. A man in the town of York, 100 kilometres east of Perth, found the needle in his kitchen sink after preparing strawberries for his family. The police say they're also investigating reports of a needle being found in a strawberry bought at a supermarket in Perth's southeast. Some growers have begun ordering metal detectors so that fruit can be scanned before it leaves farms. It's 4 minutes past 5. To sport, the All Blacks midfielder Sonny Bill Williams says his charity fight against an Australian reality TV star is not an indication he plans to relaunch his boxing career. It's simply an opportunity to help the homeless. The winner of The Bachelorette in Australia, Stu Laundy, was today confirmed as Williams's opponent for the bout in Sydney on December the 1st. Part of a fight night aimed at raising funds for the homeless in New Zealand and Australia, it will be the first in almost 4 years for Williams, who's won all 7 of his professional bouts. The New Zealand women's cricket team will take a spin-heavy bowling attack into their upcoming 3-match 2020 series against Australia. 5 of the White Ferns squad are proven international slow bowlers and should get plenty of overs during the series, starting in Sydney on September the 29th. Coach Heidi Tiffin has based the selections on her belief spin will be important at the World T20 in the West Indies in November. The Warriors hooker Isaac Luke is reportedly being pursued with increased interest by a rival NRL club. The Newcastle Herald is reporting Knights coach Nathan Brown met with Luke while he was in Wellington last week to spend time in camp with the All Blacks. Luke is off contract with the Warriors, who have already made an offer to the 31-year-old Kiwis international. That's the news.
Confidence in the coalition.
I'm the Prime Minister. I am the leader also of the most significant size party in this coalition. We have a coalition partner and a confidence and supply partner.
An historic lead.
We're in the business of winning, and you know, if you're not doing it, you're going to be moved on pretty quickly.
Honouring a commitment.
Our troops have changed the way in which they operate, they've changed the way in which they lead their men into battle.
Leading the news on Morning Reports every weekday morning from 6 to 9. Then on 9 to noon, the new coach of our National Youth League team, Natalie Lawrence, on laying the turf for women to coach men's football. And after 11, classical musician Eddie Ayres on the profound personal change he experienced after teaching the cello to children in Afghanistan. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Rain, possibly heavy, north of Auckland City, easing tomorrow morning. Waikato Bay of Plenty and Taupo, cloudy with scattered rain, spreading south this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow, but increasing fine breaks for Waikato and Taupo. Gisborne and the Wairoa district, scattered rain becoming widespread tomorrow. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay, also Taihape and Wairarapa, cloudy, a few showers developing overnight or tomorrow morning. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumarunui, mainly fine. For all of the South Island, apart from Fiordland, fine. Fiordland, a few showers about the fjords, fine elsewhere. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain clearing this evening, mostly fine tomorrow, apart from late drizzle. It's 7 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Katrina. We'll see you hour. Our top story this evening, the Prime Minister has come under fire over her economic nous after fumbling an interview question about GDP figures, shunting the Kiwi dollar higher. National MPs say Jacinda Ardern is distracted by her coalition shambles, and it's showing. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Growth figures are kept under a cone of secrecy till they're finalised, a strict embargo. The next set's due to be made public by Stats NZ on Thursday morning, which is why this interview on News Talk ZB this morning sent a few eyebrows skyward.
The GDP numbers on Thursday, have you seen them or got a hint?
Sorry, the
GDP numbers
GDP
Thursday.
Numbers. We'll be putting out the audited and final results soon.
So you have seen them?
I get a hint, yes.
Are they good?
I'm pretty pleased.
Pretty pleased about figures the Prime Minister shouldn't have seen, and so came a swift backtrack. Jacinda Ardern says she misspoke. She wasn't talking about the GDP numbers.
The GDP numbers on Thursday, have you seen them or got a hint?
Sorry, the
GDP numbers
GDP
Thursday.
Numbers.
She says she was talking about the government's financial position, the Crown accounts, not the GDP numbers.
Sorry, the
GDP numbers
GDP
Thursday.
Numbers.
The quarterly growth figures are kept top secret because of their market sensitivity. Indeed, the dollar jumped slightly after Ms Ardern's comments, but was then knocked back by other news. Ms Ardern says she wasn't confused. They were just talking about different things.
And I've looked back at the transcript and it was clear that we were talking at cross purposes. I've made sure that we've clarified immediately, of course, that I was speaking about the unaudited financial accounts because, of course, I don't have access to the GDP numbers, only statistics do. So we've clarified that. And again, as I say, not the first time Mike and I haven't been listening to each other properly.
The opposition zooming in on the misstep. Evidence, the National Party says, that Ms Ardern is distracted.
Does she know the difference between GDP and Crown financial statements?
Yes, Mr Speaker.
Did she know at 8 a.m. this morning?
Yes, Mr Speaker. Next question.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, also coming under question.
Does the Minister consider that it's part of his job as the Minister of Finance to make sure that the Prime Minister knows the difference between GDP and core Crown accounts?
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister certainly knows the difference between those things, as I do. But, you know, Mr Speaker, everybody makes mistakes.
Mistakes the Prime Minister doesn't need after a rough few weeks and a trip to New York on the horizon. Atu iti whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister says she received a text from technology entrepreneur Derek Handley in relation to the position of Chief Technology Officer, but to her recollection did not respond to it. Former Minister Claire Curran, of course, was stripped of the Government Digital Services role. This is after it was revealed she used personal emails and didn't properly record a meeting with Mr Handley, who was applying for that position. Mr Handley was paid out $100,000 after he got the job, but the offer was retracted by the government. The National Party has been pursuing Jacinda Ardern over her own communications with Mr Handley, including these questions from leader Simon Bridges.
Has she had any conversations, emails or texts with Derek Handley since she's been Prime Minister?
Mr Speaker, again to answer with some accuracy, I'd want to go back. My best recollection...
Order!
My best recollection is that I received some months ago a text from Mr Handley mentioning the CTO role, which I do not recall directly engaging with, as that would not have been appropriate.
Were the conversations, emails or texts with Mr Handley about the role of Government Chief Technology Officer, and if so, what was discussed?
Mr Speaker, I can rule out any direct verbal communication. I haven't spoken with Mr Handley in at least a year, maybe two. As I say, my best recollection is I received a text message I didn't directly engage in. For all other platforms, I would want to go back and check, but I don't recall directly communicating in regards to that role.
Now, the Speaker of the House, Trevor Mallard, has told the government it must front up tomorrow with personal emails between Ms Curran and Derek Handley held by Archives New Zealand. Meanwhile, Checkpoint can tonight confirm that Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern will appear on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert when she's in New York for the United Nations General Assembly later this month. No stranger to US television audiences, New Zealand politicians have provided plenty of comedic material for a country our size, not least among them John Oliver's dishonourable mention of Stephen Joyce's infamous Waitangi Day sex toy incident. The Prime Minister's office, when approached for comment today, would say only that Ms Ardern's itinerary would be finalised publicly on Thursday and would include American media appearances. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert boasts an audience of 3.5 million people. Exposure former Prime Minister Sir John Key says enhances our reputation in America. Mr Key recalls fondly his time on The Late Show with David Letterman when he was in New York to attend the UN Assembly almost a decade ago.
Late night comedians are an institution in the United States. They have a massive following, and whether it's David Letterman or Jay Leno or these days Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert, there's a whole bunch of them, but they have a massive following and they're quite influential. And I guess in recent times with Donald Trump, they've had a huge amount of material to work with. So there's certainly a massive audience that listens to them, and it's a way to, I guess, unwind at the end of the evening. So from my perspective, I mean, the thing I remember, I did the top 10 on David Letterman, and some of it was obviously pretty tongue-in-cheek, but he was good-humoured, and he actually was desperate to come to New Zealand, so it was great promotion, but he's terrified of flying, so he was next in on taking the flight.
And in your planning with these trips, how important is it to line these sorts of things up? Did you actively seek out that kind of appearance?
I think I wasn't really involved until at the end they said to me, as part of the New York trip that I made, that there were a number of things we were doing, and this was one of the opportunities that had come along. I think, actually, I wasn't aware of this at the time, but Tourism New Zealand had some discussions with people, and the opportunity had sort of presented itself. But I think we're a little country where 5 million people, last bus stop on the planet, getting the attention of people who maybe don't even know where New Zealand is, and this sort of broad audience is a great thing for New Zealand. And I think it's kind of a fun thing, and Kiwis are always seen as as I think down to earth sort of people we can have a bit of a laugh with. So in the United States, I think it enhances our reputation.
We seem to, for our size, we seem to get more attention perhaps than what we deserve. I can remember John Oliver, the late night host, mocking Stephen Joyce as well as other people in both your government and Bill English's. Do you think Jacinda Ardern, with her star power overseas, will get a little different treatment?
Oh, look, John Oliver was sort of pretty known for highly sort of tongue-in-cheek appearances. And again, there were plenty of occasions where he had a bit of a crack at me. I mean, if you can't laugh when you're Prime Minister and you take all these things seriously, then you're in a lot of trouble. Because I think in the end, these late night shows, they are always going to showcase stories that are a bit different or a bit wacky or whatever it might be. Did it hurt Stephen Joyce or me or Bill? I don't think so. And, whether, I'm sure they'll give Jacinda a great run, but I don't think it'll do any damage. It'll be positive, and I think positive for New Zealand. And as I said, it's the sort of thing where, a huge number of people might just whet their appetite to come to New Zealand or learn a bit more about the country.
So what's your advice to Jacinda Ardern as she struts the world stage over there?
Well, the UN week's a really big week, and, there's great opportunities for us, and it's that time we get to mix with a lot of leaders, not necessarily the ones that we traditionally do, but a lot of other countries as well. I was there when Gaddafi gave speeches. I was there when, a huge number of other leaders have given very controversial speeches, and, they were both informative at times, sometimes, rants, but they were what they were, and the world's a better place for at least having that role, I think, in that place.
Hey, could we just finish with one other question on another topic?
Yep.
I don't know whether you heard Jacinda Ardern's comments this morning. I think she's being interviewed on News Talk ZB and conflated GDP with the State of the Crown accounts. What did you make of that interview and her confusion?
When I heard it, I just thought that wouldn't be right, because I just knew when I was Prime Minister, you don't get the official information like that from the government statistician prior to its public release, and that's because those things can be market moving. So the reality is you don't get that information, and I kind of realised just from where I was that it was almost certainly an error. It doesn't matter whether it's unemployment data or GDP data, you don't get that information. You get certainly often a sense of where things are going. And the Treasury and the Reserve Bank will have a perspective, but official government stats, no minister gets that. I think the Minister of Finance maybe a moment or two beforehand, but certainly as Prime Minister, I knew you've got that information when it was publicly released.
There's reports that the dollar has moved since the comments, so do you think the Prime Minister should be more careful in future?
Oh, well, I'll leave her to reflect on that. I'm no longer in politics, so not for me to really comment.
Former Prime Minister John Key at 17 minutes past 5. Strawberry growers in Australia have this afternoon been offered $1 million compensation package in the wake of multiple acts of sabotage on their stock. Sewing needles and pins have now been found in punnets of strawberries in Queensland as well as Western Australia. That follows cases of contamination in New South Wales, Tasmania and South Australia. It's prompted growers to start dumping their stock by the truckload. There are 7 brands affected countrywide in Australia, and New Zealand supermarkets have stopped importing all Australian strawberries. Some are calling it an act of terrorism. However, while the government has called for an inquiry and while police investigate, desperate growers are actually urging Australians to keep buying the fruit, cut them up and remove any pieces of metal they might find. A short time ago, I spoke to one of those growers, Adrian Schultz. He runs Loverberry and is also the Queensland Strawberry Growers Association Vice President.
It's actually been devastating because I'm not sure if you guys are aware of the strawberry glut that's occurred over here that we've had for several weeks, which has depressed prices. But just when that seemed to be easing is when this incident happened. And, of course, that little bit of increase in price that we were hoping to see has disappeared.
There almost isn't a state or territory in Australia that hasn't been affected by this. To what extent has your business been affected by it?
Well, we're seriously wondering, we're going on a day-to-day basis, literally, and at this stage we don't know if we're going to be able to set up properly for next year. It's quite serious.
Yes, it sounds devastating, as you say. What have you done in reaction to it? What have you had to do with your stock, with your employees, etc.?
We've had to warn all our employees of the situation. I mean, they're all pretty savvy these days with the internet and Facebook, and they're aware of what's happening. But finding a home for the strawberries at the moment is the difficult part because, as you know, some of our larger retailers have chose to take the strawberries off the shelves. But look, the positive thing, the good thing is we're getting a lot of support from the public. You know, there are a lot of public Facebook things getting set up where they're showing support for the farmer, and they're saying, you know, we want the strawberries back on the shelves. We want to keep buying strawberries. The answer to dealing with these maniacs is just to slice up the strawberries, chop them up.
And so you're encouraging people to still buy them, but just obviously take great care. What's the impact if people don't do that and people stay away? We've seen videos today of Donnybrook dumping what looks like truckloads of strawberries into the ground. Do you see more of that happening, or have you had to do a little bit of that?
Yes, and that's ultimately what you've got to do. Also, you know, if you travelled around here, you'd see a lot of fields that were green a few days ago that are now brown because they've had to be sprayed out. There are several businesses around here that have had to finish up completely. We're not quite there yet, but our concern is also for the seasons like your own and our friends in Stanthorpe and Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia at the moment, whose season is in process, how this is going to affect all these other areas.
Adrian, you obviously are talking with your colleagues, with perhaps other competitors and growers. What's the feeling out there about the origin of this? Have you got any idea what type of person the culprit is, or where it's happened? What stage from farm to store can this sort of sabotage take place?
Well, look, the police are in the midst of an investigation into this. It would appear that the original incursion was a genuine situation, but since then, we believe a lot of these incidences have been copycats, bloody-minded people who perhaps want 2 minutes of fame, or they want, or who knows what they want, or what they're thinking. But it's so widespread that it can't be just one individual. It's become viral, and it's dangerous.
And you must be desperate to get on top of it. Tell us about your fears about perhaps future decisions of people, as you say, in Australia or further afield here in New Zealand and other places that you export to. Are you worried about the decisions that they might make in the future?
That's right. And the biggest impact so far, I believe, is there are, at the moment, no Queensland strawberries being imported into New Zealand, and I believe it has had an effect on the Western Australian exports. They rely heavily on that as well. And yes, it is a concern. Queensland itself has made some recent inroads into developing export markets, and of course it's going to have an impact. And this is what I don't think these people understand, the far-reaching consequences of what they do.
Can you survive this in your company, Loverberry? And already, what sort of monetary impact has this made?
It's hard to put it into dollars at this stage, but I believe that we will have to adjust our business setup for next year. We won't be operating at the same level that we are now, or we're going to have to operate differently. Yes, it's going to have an impact, and already a lot of the larger farms in this area have had to install metal detectors into their operations, and those things aren't cheap. They're expensive, and unfortunately, I don't think they're going to get any more for the strawberries just because they've got a metal detector in their pack house.
That's strawberry grower Adrian Schultz at 24 minutes past 5. A multi-millionaire paid to have impoverished Filipino children treated like toys for his depraved sexual pleasure while he sat in the comfort of his North Shore home. Martin Henry Laws, a former Takapuna Community Board Chair and Justice of the Peace, was today sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for 3 charges of dealing with children for sexual exploitation and importing and possessing pictures and videos of children being sexually abused. Now, as you can imagine, there's some fairly disturbing material here, so you have been warned. Our very diligent court reporter Edward Gay has the story.
Martin Laws paid $45,000 to charities who help child victims of sexual abuse. Today, his lawyer asked for the payments to be taken into account for an additional discount on his sentence. And while that figure would seem a lot to the children in the Philippines who Laws watched being sexually abused, it was less than half the amount he spent on live sex videos over a 9-year period. The Crown Prosecutor Robin McCoubry put it like this.
When he was interviewed by police and he was asked to estimate how much he'd spent on adult and child pornography in the Philippines, he gave a figure to police, and when it was suggested to him that that was a significant figure, he said he didn't think it was because of the large amounts he had in the bank. So if it's not significant at that stage in my submission, it's not as significant at this stage. That's not to punish him for being successful or wealthy, but as a man of means, the payment of reparation in my submission has to be seen in that context.
Laws, a successful businessman, created email accounts under fake names. He even used his wife's maiden name. He made contact with parents in the Philippines who were willing to sexually abuse their own children, while Laws sat in his Takapuna home where he watched the live-streamed videos and directed the children and parents on what to do. One of the children was just 3 years old. Laws's lawyer, David Jones QC, pointed to a psychiatric report that showed his client was a changed man.
One can see from that there has been a change, a real shift in terms of insight and empathy, and that is important. And so when one looks at that, you have a man who is doing what he can to look into himself and determine what the drivers for the offending were and trying to address those things.
In the sentencing, Justice Wiley said Laws was arrested after an international operation in the Philippines needed 5 members of a child sex ring. Laws had made payments totalling over $2,000 to 3 of the members. Laws voluntarily gave his email password to the police, which led to investigators in the Philippines conducting a sting operation, arresting 1 set of parents and rescuing their children. The police found almost 300 videos and images of children being sexually abused on Law's home computers. He admitted what he had done, but he also downplayed his offending.
You also stated that you were helping the people involved by giving them money as they were living in poverty, and that you believed that you were being exploited by the people you dealt with in the Philippines rather than that you were exploiting the children involved.
Justice Wiley said Laws knew how young the victims were and that they were living in poverty.
It is apparent from the examples of the electronic messages set out in the summary of facts that the abuse to which the children were subjected at your direction was very much at the higher end. It was degrading and dehumanising. I agree with the Crown's submission that you were paying to have the children used as toys.
He said the online chat sessions showed the children were degraded and dehumanised at the behest of Laws.
But for anonymous voyeurs prepared to pay for such services, the trade of dealing in young people and vulnerable children for exploitation would not exist. It makes no difference to the child victims that they were being abused at the direction of a faceless and unknown person in a faraway country. They were still being abused.
Justice Wiley began with a prison term of 8.5 years, but took time off his sentence for his cooperation with the police, his reparation payments, and the full discount for his early guilty pleas. But the judge declined to give him an extra discount for remorse, saying Law's attempts to understand his own behaviour came very late in the day. The final sentence of 4.5 years means Martin Laws will be eligible for parole after serving just a third of his sentence in 18 months' time. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gaiaho.
It's coming up to 5:30, and coming up soon on Checkpoint, Oxfam accuses 4 multinational drug companies of avoiding millions of dollars worth of New Zealand taxes every year. Mayor Phil Goff walks the streets of Auckland to help count the city's homeless. And Game of Thrones and the marvellous Mrs. Maisel take out the big awards at the Emmys today. Thank you for your feedback. We have got a text in from one listener saying, I'm just back from 5 weeks in Europe, amazed that everyone overseas knows Jacinda Ardern is our, as this texter puts it, young, funky PM. She definitely has star power and is good for New Zealand's image overseas. A simple yes from John Key was needed. Thank you very much for getting in touch. You can text in on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, as well as Facebook. Checkpoint is the name of the program on Facebook, and of course email checkpoint at radionz.co.nz. Plenty more to come, particularly on Donald Trump and his tariffs with China. But first, Katrina Batten with the news headlines.
Former Justice of the Peace Martin Henry Laws has been told that voyeurs like him keep the trade in child sexual abuse going. In the High Court in Auckland today, Laws was jailed for 4.5 years for paying Filipino parents to sexually abuse their children while he watched on the internet from his North Shore home. Justice Wiley said the 75-year-old gave directions about what he wanted to see, and his youngest victim was 3 years old. The deaths of 8 cattle following a 1080 drop in and around a Waikato Wildlife Reserve a fortnight ago is being looked into by the Department of Conservation. The cows seem to have got through a fence into the area where the poison was dropped, and DOC is working with the owner of land next to the Mapara Reserve to find out how it happened. DOC says it had told the farmer to remove the cattle 2 weeks before the 1080 drop. The Speaker has told the State Services Minister to bring emails between Labour MP Claire Curran and technology entrepreneur Derek Hanley to Parliament tomorrow. As Digital Services Minister, Ms Curran used personal emails and failed to properly record a meeting with Mr Handley, who was applying to be the Chief Technology Officer. Trevor Mallard says it will be good for transparency if Chris Hipkins brings the emails to the House. A court has been told Dame Jenny Shipley and other Mainzeal directors should have known it wouldn't be able to get back the $33 million it loaned to the shell company MLG. The construction company, which collapsed in 2013, owing creditors $117 million, is being sued for $75 million. The prosecutor, Mark O'Brien, told the High Court in Auckland today Dame Jenny and the other directors should have known the loans couldn't be repaid and that Mainzeal was in trouble. Some people in rural Glenorchy are facing their second night without power. Aurora Energy says supply has been restored for thousands of Wakatipu Basin residents since yesterday's snowfall, and most Glenorchy customers should have power back by nightfall. However, 90 customers outside the township may not be connected tonight. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock. In 28 minutes.
We'll see you then. Thank you very much, Katrina. United States President Donald Trump has opened up a new front in his trade war with China by announcing plans to slap tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese-made goods. Conway Giddens reports from Reuters.
Will be a lot of money coming into the coffers of the United States of America.
The Trump administration upping the tariff fight with China, announcing it plans to slap tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese-made goods, a move that will drag the consumer electronics sector into the brawl. Trump taking the steps to turn the screws on one of America's biggest trading partners, hoping more pain will bring the Chinese back to the bargaining table. Trump making good on a threat earlier in the day on Twitter, quote, "If countries will not make fair deals with us, they will be tariffed." White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow offered China an olive branch.
We are ready to negotiate and talk with China anytime that they are ready for serious and substantive negotiations towards free trade to reduce tariffs and non-tariff barriers.
The Chinese say they are willing to talk, but find Trump's tariff threats nothing short of a bullying tactic and vowed to retaliate.
We have always maintained that the only correct means to resolve the trade dispute is through dialogue and consultation on an equal basis, with mutual trust and respect.
And Beijing isn't backing down, warning in an editorial that it is looking for a counterattack and threatened to, quote, keep increasing the pain. The threat, knocking down tech stocks like Apple and chipmakers Intel and Micron, since gadget makers rely heavily on Chinese production to keep prices down.
Well, we can turn to business news now on that topic with Nona Peltier. Hey, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Have you got anything yet from what China's reaction to this is actually going to be? We heard those conciliatory words in that report. It probably won't be so kind.
No, the South China Morning Post is reporting that
unnamed sources indicating that the Chinese delegation will not be sent next week to the United States now. So whether or not this is we don't know. It's not verified, but yeah, it may not happen at all. So rather than bringing them to the table, it may have kept them away. So we will see what happens there. I don't think, certainly the market has already somewhat reacted to this. It was anticipated. So we didn't see a lot of movement, but we didn't see a lot of positive reaction to it either. Certainly the Asian markets and the Australian markets were down. That was in contrast to our own market. The US dollar dipped a little bit, and that helped our dollar, and it helped the Australian dollar. But the Australian market, which is exposed to, say, copper, for example, it showed in their markets they were down 0.5% today. We were up 0.5%, and it was interesting. And our dollar really ticked up a little bit too. But overall, the market is looking really skittish, and I think that we're going to see a lot more volatility ahead, especially when the market sees how China reacts in the end to all of this.
Absolutely. And turning back home, more good news with Kathmandu making a bumper profit.
Yes, record profit for Kathmandu. Yes, they made an after-tax profit of $50.5 million for the year to July. That compares with $38 million. Now, that was partly because they had some strong growth in their North American business. They recently acquired their partner, Oboe Shoes, and that's helped their bottom line. And as well, their online sales have been doing really well as well. I think there was a 38% increase in online sales, accounting for like 10% of the total. So they're doing really well with their online business.
And every employee got a bonus. How much did they get?
Well, they got $1,000 each. It's a one-time
bad,
payment. No, it's pretty good, but it wasn't expected. The market wasn't expecting the company to pay out. It's $2 million a lot. It's a big, hefty sum to pay out to your staff.
Yeah, well, good on them for spreading it out and,
they
and
sure
probably
have.
getting credit where it deserves.
Yeah, so the investors liked the result overall, and the company's share price rose. Now I have the numbers here someplace. Yeah, they rose 1.5%, 5 cents to $3.23, not bad. And that, again, was reflected in our overall market. We rose 0.5%, that's 44 points, and we're sitting at 93.16. That's pretty good considering when you're looking at the Asian markets, they're mostly red, except Japan. Japan is up as well, about the same as we are. So Japan is going to benefit from whatever the fallout goes, I guess, with, well, benefit for now. We'll see what Donald Trump has to say in the future about Japan.
Until he turns his sights.
He has mentioned them once or twice. Now, our dollar, we're steady at 65.9 US cents and 91.6 Australian and 50.1 pence. So we'll see what happens. Expect a lot of volatility. It's not over yet.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for the update. Keep us informed. Nana Peltier with the business news at 37.5 minutes past 5. Oxfam is accusing 4 multinational drug companies of avoiding millions of dollars worth of New Zealand taxes every year. The charity says Abbott, Johnson & Johnson, Merck and Pfizer are shifting their profits to overseas havens to pay less tax and contributing to the growing gap between the haves and the have-nots. But Inland Revenue says Oxfam's figures are misleading. Jessie Chang reports.
$21 million. That's how much Oxfam says the pharmaceutical companies are stashing away every year that they should be paying in New Zealand taxes. Money that the charity says could pay for 400 graduate nurses. Its New Zealand Executive Director, Rachel Mercurier, says it's not illegal, but the firms are depriving the government of money to spend alleviating poverty and providing public services.
We know that the significant gap that we're all concerned about in wealth inequality between the extremely rich and the growing body of those who are poor, that tax avoidance is one of the drivers of that inequality.
Rachel Mercurier is asking the government to make multinational corporations publish key financial information about their operations in every country. She says that would make it clear whether they are paying their fair share of tax or not. But John Nash from Inland Revenue says Oxfam is using methodology which completely misrepresents what is happening in New Zealand.
Well, Oxfam have applied a global average profit margin which attributes just far too much profit to New Zealand. You really need to look at what is actually done in New Zealand, what functions are performed here, what assets are utilised and what risks are taken.
John Nash says IRD's monitoring of multinational companies is detailed.
We have a comprehensive compliance program that looks at all multinational companies with $30 million of turnover and upwards. So we really do cover the field very comprehensively.
But he wouldn't be drawn on whether the 4 multinationals named by Oxfam were shifting profits overseas.
Would it be fair to say that then you're pretty confident that these companies are paying the correct tax, that they should be, compared to the operations here in New Zealand?
Well, I can't talk about these particular companies.
The Revenue Minister Stuart Nash has asked officials to look into Oxfam's report.
I won't be talking to the companies at all, but I will be asking officials just for a very brief report on the Oxfam document and to give me an idea if in fact their figure was close to the mark or if in fact the modelling they used is way off.
New legislation tightening tax rules for multinational companies came into effect in July. IRD estimates that will result in an extra $200 million of tax each year. Abbott, Johnson & Johnson, Merck and Pfizer did not front for interviews with RNZ. In statements, all 4 companies say they abide by tax laws and pay all taxes owed in New Zealand. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, Kodisi Chang tēnei.
It's 20 minutes to 6. We've just got an update that's come in from the police about a crash at Orari. This is near Timaru. Police are confirming that 3 people are in a serious condition as a result of the crash to date. It happened 20 minutes to 4. The 3 seriously injured occupants have been helicoptered to hospital, and of the remaining occupants, 1 person has moderate injuries and 4 others have minor or no injuries at all. It seems it was a crash between a car and a camper van. The road is still closed and diversions are in place. That's Orari near Timaru. A court has heard Dame Jenny Shipley was among the directors of a failed construction company who should have known it wouldn't be able to recoup millions of dollars in loans. The former Prime Minister sat in the public gallery of the High Court in Auckland for the second day of the case against Mainzeal's former directors, who are accused of mismanaging the construction giant before its collapse. Mainzeal was the country's 3rd largest construction company when it went into liquidation back in 2013, owing creditors more than $117 million. Matthew Tunison reports.
As well as being a Mainzeal director, Dame Jenny Shipley was on the board of a company that owed Mainzeal some $33 million that was never paid back. In 2004 and 2005, Mainzeal gave millions in loans to the shell company MLG Limited, which was part of the same group of companies. Prosecutors argued today that Dame Jenny and Richard Yan, who were directors on both companies, should have known MLG couldn't pay the money back. Dame Jenny also signed off on one of the loans on behalf of MLG. As early as December 2008, MLG's financial statements recorded that it owed $28.6 million to Mainzeal and had negative equity of $44.8 million. Prosecutor Mark O'Brien said that in February 2010, Dame Jenny emailed the board's chairman expressing concern about a parent company restructure and the implications for recouping the loan.
Dame Jenny, clearly on behalf of the board and clearly concerned about where things stood post-separation or post-restructuring, emailed the chairman, John Walker. And we note there some of the concerns she raised. First of all, she, not a concern, but noted that cash flow was largely on track, although there was often a concern.
However, it wasn't until July 2010 that Mainzeal's directors were formally told that MLG could not pay its debt. Mr O'Brien told the court the directors should have known this long before then, yet no steps were taken. A 2008 report by accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers had also noted that in order for Mainzeal to keep afloat, it could not survive without support from the other companies in the group.
They noted that in order for MPC to operate on a standalone basis, it required a cash injection because, excluding the intercompany loans, MPC was in a deficit position, not operating profitably and could not survive without support from the remainder of the group. So that's what PwC said.
Mainzeal had counted on support from these affiliated companies, yet there was no guarantee they would indeed inject capital into the ailing business, and they didn't.
Despite these unresolved issues, and they were, and despite the precarious financial position, and it was because, for no other reason than PwC had identified it, the directors allowed the company to continue.
Furthermore, Mainzeal was subject to mounting leaky building claims. and Dame Jenny had expressed concern about the company's legacy issues, which the prosecutor said may have stemmed from the under-provisioning for leaky building claims.
Legacy claims continue to emerge, and we say were not properly analysed in the kind of detail and with the kind of attention that was required for a company in Mainzeal's position.
As well as Dame Jenny, one of the other directors being sued for $75 million is the former Briley's chief executive, Sir Paul Collins. The company's liquidators claim the directors allowed Mainzeal to continue trading while insolvent for more than 5 years. This civil case before Justice Francis Cook is set down for 6 weeks. For Checkpoint, Matthew Tunison.
It's 5:45. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. The death toll from a major storm in the US has now risen to 25, including 3 babies, with authorities warning the worst flooding may be yet to come. Former Hurricane Florence has caused several rivers to burst their banks in both North and South Carolina. CNN's Polo Sandoval reports from Lumberton, North Carolina.
Deadly and deep floodwaters are rushing through the Carolinas as days of rainfall break 140-year records in some places. Deaths continuing to mount, including 1-year-old Caden Lee Welch, whose body was found this morning. Police say the baby was swept out of his mother's arms as she tried to pass through fast-moving water Sunday.
She was a stranger to this community, driving through this road she did not know. The water forced her off the road and across an open field.
There are ongoing rescue efforts across the region as water levels continue to rise. The Lumber River outside of Wilmington invaded many neighborhoods, still not yet recovered after Hurricane Matthew 2 years ago. Dozens who thought they had survived the worst of Hurricane Florence now suddenly reliant on rescue workers as they leave their homes behind.
Some people say they've been praying for a while. Some people are crying, and some people are just like, thank you, Lord, you know.
Teams searching for survivors in submerged trucks and hovering above flooded homes to airlift citizens to safety. One Myrtle Beach official tells CNN, quote, "We are slowly becoming an island as some citizens try to make their way through flooded roadways by car and even canoe."
They're saying 500-year flood levels. This is not a matter of hours and days. It's a matter of weeks and months and maybe even years to fully recover from the storm.
Flood watches and warnings have now expanded to include 10 states and nearly 30 million people, all looking at the Carolinas for signs of what may be coming next.
That's CNN's Polo Sandoval from North Carolina, and at least 20 bodies have been pulled out from the landslide caused by Typhoon Mangkhut in the northern Philippines. Authorities said 55 people were still missing, 6 of them children, after a landslide in the northern village of Ukab in Itogon, Benguet, and buried several structures as it came down. Several miners volunteered to join the retrieval operations while families waited for signs of their loved ones. It's coming up to 12 minutes to 6. The nomination of President Donald Trump's pick for the Supreme Court is in jeopardy. A woman has gone public with allegations that Brett Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her in the 1980s during a high school party. Several Republican senators have joined Democrats in calling for a vote on Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation to be delayed. From Washington, here's the BBC's John Sopel.
Brett Kavanaugh until last week was gliding effortlessly to his seat on the all-powerful Supreme Court. Conservative, charming, popular and well-connected, he seemed the perfect pick to fill the vacant seat.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give...
But now a woman's come forward, a psychology professor from California, to say that she was sexually assaulted by Mr Kavanaugh when they were teenagers some 35 years ago. Christine Blasey Ford told the Washington Post that she'd been pinned down on a bed by him and that he'd covered her mouth when she tried to scream. "I thought he might inadvertently kill me," she said. Her lawyer says she'll do whatever's necessary.
She is willing to hopefully tell her story in a manner that is a fair proceeding.
Judge Kavanaugh has issued a statement emphatically denying the charge. "This is a completely false allegation," he says. "I have never done anything like what the accuser describes to her or to anyone." The White House is still pushing his nomination, but they'll be watching anxiously in case anything else emerges.
Judge Kavanaugh is one of the finest people that I've ever known. He's an outstanding intellect, an outstanding judge, respected by everybody. Never had even a little blemish on his record. I want him to go in at the absolute highest level. And I think to do that, you have to go through this. If it takes a little delay, it'll take a little delay.
We've been here before. When Clarence Thomas was nominated by George H.W. Bush to the Supreme Court in 1991, he seemed a shoo-in until one of his colleagues, Anita Hill, came forward to testify that she'd been sexually assaulted by him.
Thomas told me graphically of his own sexual prowess.
In the end, Mr. Thomas was confirmed and still sits on the Supreme Court. But this is 2018, and Me Too. The White House and Republican leadership have some delicate judgments to make. Elected politicians may come and go, but a Supreme Court justice is for life. And for Republicans, the dream of a clear Conservative majority on the court is almost within touching distance. The chances are that Brett Kavanaugh will still be confirmed, but everything is now fluid. And if he does fall by the wayside, that will be a blow for Donald Trump as well.
John Sopel there from Washington at 10 minutes to 6. The first New Zealander to go on trial for insider trading says he sold his shares in the software company because its poor performance was obvious to anyone who was crunching the numbers. Hamish Mark Sansom is charged with using information not available to the public to trade shares. He's accused of dumping his E-Road stock in 2015 after a tip-off from a friend who worked at the road transport software company. Annika Smith has been at the High Court in Auckland and filed this report.
You text him back, "You're a bad boy, ... but thanks." Why did you text him back that message?
Well, he shouldn't have sent me a confidential document, so he is a bad boy. He shouldn't have done it. Yeah, that's why I said that.
But thanks?
Well, he's obviously thinking about me, thinking of me, or thinking it would be a good idea, but you know, he shouldn't have done it.
That was Hamish Sansom being questioned by his lawyer, David Jones QC, over a string of text messages at the centre of the case. Mr Sansom is accused of selling off his shares in E-Road in 2015 after a friend who worked there sent him a text message that read, "US sales not doing too well. Time to sell up? Confidential, obviously." The Crown says Mr Sansom took the chance to dump 15,000 shares for $51,000 before E-Road went public about its sales, which led to an inevitable drop in its share price. But Mr Sansom took the stand today to deny cheating the system, telling the court he was worried about the company after reviewing its financial performance.
I was very concerned. I thought it was quite a poor performance if you looked at the numbers, because there was not only these issues that had been identified in the reports we've just reviewed. You know, it's talking about 8 to 10 weeks behind. This was their most important year. This was the year they had to prove themselves in Oregon.
Hamish Sansom said E-Road had set milestones in its expansion into the US market, but the numbers from its business in Oregon showed things were not tracking so well.
The New Zealand market was going well, but the PFI was all about Oregon. So they're kind of using the New Zealand performance, which was going well, to compensate for the fact Oregon wasn't going well. They were kind of walking on eggshells.
Mr Sansom also had bills to pay and told the court that selling his shares in E-Road was the only way he could keep his head above water. The trial before Justice Fitzgerald and a jury of 6 men and 6 women is due to wrap up at the end of the week. Atuiti ko te mātua, ko Annika Smith aho.
7 minutes to 6. Game of Thrones and The Marvellous Mrs Maisel have taken out the big awards at the Emmys today. The HBO fantasy series was named the Best Drama Series, while The Marvellous Mrs Maisel took the award for Best Comedy, Lead Actress, Supporting Actress, Writing and Directing. But some of the shows, including The Handmaid's Tale, which were expected to claim awards, missed out altogether. Nita Blakeperson reports.
There was all the usual glitz and glam at today's ceremony, with stars strutting down the gold carpet to mark the Emmys' 70th anniversary. Saturday Night Live's Kate McKinnon and Kenan Thompson kicked the event off at the Microsoft Theatre in Los Angeles with a skit in which they claim to have solved Hollywood's problem with a lack of diversity.
This year's Emmy Awards has the most diverse group of nominees in Emmy history. I'm going to go ahead and say it. We solved it.
But when the awards ceremony eventually got underway, the first 9 winners were all white. Game of Thrones led the nominations with 22 nods. It took out the top honour of Best Drama Series, beating last year's champion The Handmaid's Tale. Amazon's The Marvellous Mrs. Maisel, about a 1950s housewife who turns to stand-up comedy, won the Emmy for Best Comedy Series. Mrs. Maisel also took home 4 other awards, including Best Comedy Actress for Rachel Brosnahan.
And one of the things I love the most about this show, while I have you captive for another 2 seconds, is that it's about a woman who's finding her voice anew, and it's something that's happening all over the country right now. One of the most important ways that we can find and use our voices is to vote. So if you haven't already registered, do it on your cell phone right now. Vote, show up, and bring a friend to the polls. Thank you so much.
Claire Foy beat The Handmaid's Tale star Elizabeth Moss and Killing Eve's Sandra Oh to win the Best Drama Actress Emmy for her portrayal of Queen Elizabeth in the Netflix drama The Crown.
This wasn't supposed to happen. I just felt so proud then, being in the company of such extraordinary performances. And I know everyone's talking at the moment about women in the industry, but if that's anything to go by, bloody hell. And that's technically not swearing. But Sandra Oh, I just love you.
Matthew Rhys took his first Best Drama Actor Emmy for playing a conflicted Russian spy in the final season of the FX Cold War series The Americans. Saturday Night Live won as expected for Variety Sketch Series, taking its lifetime Emmy total to a record-setting 72 wins. The Assassination of Gianni Versace took the Emmy for Best Limited Series, and Darren Criss, who played the serial killer who murdered the Italian designer in Miami in 1997, won the Outstanding Lead Actor Emmy for his performance in the show. Notable misses on the night were The Handmaid's Tale and Killing Eve, neither of which received any awards. But one of the biggest shocks of the night came when presumed frontrunner Donald Glover, the star and creator of the show Atlanta, lost out in the comedy acting category to Bill Hader's show business satire Barry.
I did not think this was going to happen. I share this with the cast, Henry Winkler.
And it was for that role that Henry Winkler took home his first Emmy, supporting actor in a comedy series, 42 years after he was first nominated for playing the Fonz in Happy Days. He thanked his family and had an important message for his children.
My wife, Stacy, oh my God, my cast and crew, and the kids, Jed, Zoe, and Max, you can go to bed now, Daddy won!
It wasn't just the awards that were the cause of celebration. An unexpected proposal from one winner had some of the crowd in tears. Glenn Weiss won the Emmy for Outstanding Directing for a Variety Special, and during his acceptance speech he proposed to his girlfriend Jan Svensson, a first in Primetime Emmy Awards history.
Jan, you are the sunshine in my life. And Mom was right, don't ever let go of your sunshine. You wonder why I don't like to call you my girlfriend? Because I want to call you my wife.
And that was a yes from Jan Svensson, who headed onto stage to be with her new fiancé. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
You're listening to Checkpoint RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Thank you very much for joining us. There's plenty more to come up on the program. After 6 o'clock, Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff joined the hundreds of volunteers scouring Auckland last night in an effort to count the city's homeless. They went out with high-vis vests and clipboards in hand to try to get a bit of a snapshot on where the city is with its homeless population. He tells our reporter Zach Fleming how he went incognito, hoping to blend in as just another volunteer. He went to the Mangere town centre where he interviewed 3 people. He was the first ever audit of the number of rough sleepers in Auckland, stretching from Wellsford in the north down to Waiuku in the south. Also coming up, a new agency called the Office for Maori Crown Relations Te Arawhiti is to be set up to oversee the government's work with Maori as part of the Crown Maori Relations portfolio. And government parties that were critical of the original Iraq deployment have been accused of hypocrisy as part of the cabinet that approved a further extension. Don't forget, of course, we would love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can also tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. And of course, we are on Facebook as well. You can also email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We did get a little bit of feedback. Someone did suggest at some stage that we should be talking or asking John Key about his experience on Hard Talk when he was there in London, rather than his experience on the David Letterman show when he was in New York. Someone suggesting that he did face some pretty tough questions there about how or whether New Zealand really was 100% pure, as we claim to be with our advertising slogan. But we did ask him, of course, how he was on David Letterman, because of Jacinda Ardern's upcoming interview on Stephen Colbert, which we've just announced, or we've just made public tonight. It will be announced, of course, on Thursday, but we have that information as there are some media hits coming up there in her trip coming up in the USA. More to come, of course, on Checkpoint, and I think we're going to the news bulletin with the Katrina Batten.
Really?
Once we get there.
So Stephen Colbert, do you watch him ever?
I have seen him. You get these clips, you know, you never sit down and watch the whole thing, do you? You just get these clips.
Funny.
He's very funny. And
He's very funny.
And I'm just amazed at what interest they take in New Zealand.
Will be fascinating, and he's a big Lord of the Rings fan and
Of
Hobbit fan,
course.
so he'd be very interested in anything that goes on in New Zealand.
He is indeed.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batten aho. Simon Bridges challenged Jacinda Ardern's economic nous in Parliament this afternoon. In a radio interview this morning, the Prime Minister said she'd seen a hint of the latest GDP number and was pleased by it. That information was under strict embargo until its release on Thursday. Ms Ardern has since said she was actually talking about the Crown accounts, not GDP. Nationals leader zeroed in on the misstep.
Does she know the difference between GDP and Crown financial statements?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Did she know at 8 a.m. this morning?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Next question.
Simon Bridges says Jacinda Ardern is clearly distracted by the shambles of her coalition government. Also in Parliament today, Ms Ardern revealed she got a text message from the entrepreneur Derek Handley about the Chief Technology Officer role advertised by the government. Mr Handley was offered the job, but the offer was later retracted and he was paid $110,000 in compensation. Ms Ardern told the House about the text.
My best recollection is that I received some months ago a text from Mr Handley mentioning the CTO role, which I do not recall directly engaging with, as that would not have been appropriate.
Jacinda Ardern took the digital services portfolio off Claire Curran for failing to properly record a meeting with Mr Handley about his interest in the job. A group that campaigns against the sexual denigration of women and children says the imprisoning of a millionaire today shows predators come from all walks of life. In the High Court in Auckland, Martin Henry Laws, a former JP and Takapuna Community Board Chair, has been sentenced to 4.5 years for paying Filipino parents to sexually abuse their children on the internet while he watched from his North Shore home. Stop Demand's founder, Denise Ritchie, who was at the sentencing, said outside court that the case sends a strong message to offenders.
The sexual exploitation, the sexual violation of children is vile in and of itself. But when people are using their wealth to exploit families and children in impoverished countries, it's particularly heinous.
Denise Ritchie of Stop Demand. Gang members in Whanganui are worried they'll be targets of a rival gang if they lose name suppression in court. 10 defendants appeared before the Whanganui District Court today. Lee Marama McLaughlin was there.
Facing charges of participating in a criminal group and in some cases threatening to kill or possessing a firearm, 9 defendants pleaded not guilty today and 1 man entered no plea. It comes 4 weeks after the death of Kavanaugh, a member of the mongrel mob who is believed to have been shot by a rival gang. So far, 12 men have been charged in relation to that homicide investigation, but no one has been charged with murder. The court heard there were fears of gang retaliation if the defendants lose name suppression and become known to the public. Judge Charles Blackie kept name suppression until another hearing on Tuesday next week. At the Whanganui District Court, I'm Lee Marama McLaughlin.
The Department of Conservation says it looks like cows broke through a gate to get to feed in an area where 1080 had been dropped. DOC is investigating how 8 cattle died following a pest control operation over Waikato conservation and private land 2 weeks ago. The cows were in a paddock next to private land where the farmer had agreed to have 1080 dropped. DOC's Operations Director David Spears says it's working with the landowner to find out how this happened.
On the evidence we have at the moment, the only logical explanation is that the animals pushed their way out of the safe paddock that they were into through a gate that wasn't very well secured, so the gate wasn't on hinges, it was wired to a post. and into the operational area.
David Spears says the department is confident no 1080 was dropped in the wrong area. The internet watchdog NetSafe won't be pursuing a complaint made by Sir Ray Avery about a media website. Sir Ray had accused Newsroom of causing him severe emotional distress in a series of articles about him and his inventions. He went to NetSafe saying the publication amounted to harassment and digital harm under the Harmful Digital Communications Act. NetSafe's director, Martin Cocker, says it's exhausted its mediation ability under the Act.
If we don't feel that we can progress the case, then our advice is to consider taking it to the district court, but that is entirely optional for the complainant.
Martin Cocker. Newsroom says it will not be removing the articles Sir Ray took issue with. It's 6:05. Sport, the Silver Ferns will try to bounce back from a record defeat to England in their Netball Quad Series opener when they face South Africa in Tauranga tonight. Ravinda Hunia reports.
After getting her first game as New Zealand coach under her belt, Nolene Taurua says the focus for the Silver Ferns against the Proteas tonight is doing better under pressure. That frailty was exposed in Saturday's disappointing 13-goal loss to England, where the Ferns struggled with the physicality of the Commonwealth Games champions. The other area being watched closely is shooting accuracy, after a success rate of only 68% against the Roses. Taurua has signalled changes to tonight's starting 7, Koravinda Hunia aho.
The English League star Sam Burgess says he's keen for the truth to come out of an investigation into a scandal that has hit his South Sydney club. The NRL Integrity Unit is investigating allegations lewd images were sent to a young woman from one of Burgess's social media accounts. Burgess didn't want to go into details when speaking ahead of the Rabbitohs semi-final against the Sydney Roosters on Saturday. And former Australian rules player Michael Dixon has stunned American football fans by performing a rugby-style dropkick in an NFL match today. In his first season with the Seattle Seahawks, Dixon twice used the kick to restart the game against the Chicago Bears, astonishing TV commentators. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our economist Brian Easton takes a good hard look at the global economy. He wonders if it's getting a bit wobbly. He's not the only one. And just to lighten things up, a window on the world of human procreation, if you still think it's worthwhile.
Someone with autism, they don't like shopping or they're reluctant to go shopping?
It's about understanding that it isn't shopping, it's the music or it's the lights or it's the people or it's the fact that there's big deliveries at the same time, which creates more noise and more sensory issues.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Rain, possibly heavy north of Auckland City, easing tomorrow morning. Waikato Bay of Plenty and Taupo, cloudy with scattered rain spreading south this evening. Isolated showers tomorrow, but increasing fine breaks for Waikato and Taupo. Gisborne and the Wairoa District, scattered rain becoming widespread tomorrow. But the remainder of Hawke's Bay, also Taihepe and Wairarapa, cloudy, a few showers developing overnight or tomorrow morning. Waitomo to Wellington, including Taumaranui, mainly fine. For all of the South Island, apart from Fiordland, fine. Fiordland, a few showers about the fjords, fine elsewhere. And for the Chatham Islands, occasional rain clearing this evening, mostly fine tomorrow, apart from late drizzle. It's exactly 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
And it's Alex Perrottet joining you tonight. So Katrina, Michael Dixon's his name. He
Yes.
drop-kicked a ball in the NFL.
Yes.
So do you reckon we get him back here to coach up Bowden Barrett?
I think so. 4 dropped goal. Oh, man.
Well, and no attempts at any drop goals. There's been a little bit of criticism about that, perhaps.
No, I don't think he should have done a drop goal, but at the end, but he shouldn't have missed all those other attempts.
He shouldn't have missed those
No,
other ones,
no,
those
no,
place kicks, which you do see a little bit more often in NFL as well, rather than those
the pressure, so
drop
he had
kicks.
a week off and it's the pressure now.
That's
so.
right. Well, we've got plenty of others who want to have a go as well.
That's true.
But he's still a champion.
Yeah. A year to the World Cup. We're okay.
We'll be
okay.
fine.
Yeah, we can handle it.
Thanks for tuning in to Checkpoint or streaming or just listening, however you're doing it tonight. We do appreciate your company. You do get in touch as well with all your feedback if you have something to say about things that are going to air. 2101 is the text, and there's also email and Twitter and Facebook as well. Government parties that were highly critical of the original Iraq deployment have been accused of hypocrisy as part of the cabinet that approved a further extension. Cabinet ministers, including from Labor and New Zealand First, signed off on extending the training mission until June next year, by which time New Zealand's contribution in the region will be fully reviewed. Now, both parties were opposed to the deployment in 2015, sanctioned by the National-led government, but have now had a change of heart. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
143 New Zealand troops are part of the deployment, a joint training mission with Australia based primarily at Taji Camp north of Baghdad. The mandate was due to expire in November, but that's been extended until mid-next year. The government says that's to fulfil an existing commitment to see out the scheduled end of the training program. As the Labor leader at the time, Andrew Little, said in 2015, there was no case to send troops to Iraq. Now, as Justice Minister, he says there are good reasons his view has changed.
When I went back this year, it was a completely different story. The Iraqi army was different. The determination and commitment of the personnel was a world apart from what I'd seen 2 years previously.
The Defence Minister, New Zealand First MP Ron Mark, also opposed the deployment in 2015. His own statement was read back to him in Parliament this afternoon by National's Mark Mitchell.
Has he seen the quote? Does he not realise that he sent our brave New Zealand soldiers to Iraq on a fool's errand? And the training the Iraqi army to stand and fight is literally mission impossible. If so, does he agree with it?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I recognise that quote, and on the information I had at the time, I still stand by that statement.
The National Party leader, Simon Bridges, says he supports the extension, but he says the decision from MPs who actively opposed the deployment a few years ago is hypocritical.
The Prime Minister is now effectively trying to say that something's changed on the ground. Fundamentally, it hasn't.
Ron Mark says he has access to different information now than when he voiced his opposition.
Fundamentally, I think what is different is that I've had the opportunity to go out to Iraq myself and visit. I've met with the Prime Minister, I've met with the Minister of Defence, I took a delegation from Parliament, met with the troops, met with the commander of the Baghdad fighting school.
The Greens support Labor on confidence and supply, and co-leader James Shaw says they've had a consistent and long-standing position. He was asked whether he thought the Cabinet decision was hypocritical.
You know, we've always said that we don't think that those deployments should continue. In fact, we didn't think we should have gone in the first place. I think that the weight of evidence is that acts of violence have actually increased while foreign forces have been on the ground rather than decreased.
But do you think Labor and New Zealand First, your governing partners, were hypocritical in changing their position?
I think that's a question for them.
New Zealand currently has 11 military trainers in Afghanistan, a deployment that's been steadily wound down since this country first sent troops in 2001. That's been extended until next September, but New Zealand's contributions there and in Iraq will be reviewed, with the government sending the strong signal they're likely to look very different as a result. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It's 6:12. Joining the hundreds of volunteers scanning Auckland last night in an effort to count the city's homeless was the Mayor, Phil Goff. He was the first ever audit of the number of rough sleepers in Auckland, stretching from Wellsford in the north to Waiuku in the south. The Mayor dressed incognito, hoping to blend in as just one other volunteer, and went along to the Mangere Town Centre, where he interviewed 3 people. Mr Goff spoke to our reporter Zach Fleming about the experience and whether a number will be able to actually do anything to help Auckland's homeless.
I kind of didn't want to go out wearing my mayoral robes, not that I have them, but I wore a beanie and partly to keep warm, I guess. But I was just there as a foot soldier working with hundreds of other volunteers that went out last night, and it was really about trying to get an accurate idea of what the current state of homelessness is around Auckland, and also trying to get a better understanding of how people are living out there. And I think probably one of the most interesting things when we were doing because we had an interview sheet, we were doing the interview, and one of the questions was to the guy, do you feel safe on the street? Oh, yeah, it's quite safe out here. Another question, have you been admitted to hospital? Oh, yeah, I was in hospital earlier this year. I said, oh, what was the matter? Did you have pneumonia or something? Oh, no. He said, I got stabbed. And, having told me that it was safe out there, it just highlighted the fact that you're living on the margins. You're there with people that are often profoundly mentally ill quite often and suffering from the effects of drug or alcohol addiction. And you have absolutely no security. You know, all your possessions in the world you're probably carrying with you, and there's no security there.
Yeah, safety is a sliding scale. One person's safe isn't not comparable at all to another person's safe. But when you were incognito going around and talking to these people, were you able to interview them as you said, just another foot soldier? They weren't aware they were talking to the mayor, and so therefore, did anything they say surprise you? Was there any brutal honesty that you wasn't quite expecting?
No, just the fact that, of the two people that were sleeping rough, one had been out there for about 3 years and the other for nearly a couple of years. And it was just kind of the acceptance that this is life as it is, and we're living just moment by moment. And, and it really... You kind of felt for people divorced from their family because they didn't have contact with their family. One, I said, look, are you working? No, I'm not working. Oh, you're on a benefit then? No, I'm not on a benefit because I don't have any address. These people are just surviving from day to day, and it's appalling for them. And in many ways, it's a mark of failure on our society that they are still living like that.
So what can the homeless count do for these people?
I think the critical reason for having it is just to try to get an accurate sizing of the problem. Now, our count last night will underestimate it because we didn't find every person sleeping rough. And obviously, because we were looking at people sleeping rough and in cars, we weren't including probably the thousands of families that are doubled up in homes or living in garages. But to get an idea of the number of people out there, and because it's a point-in-time survey, and we can do it again at some point, to work out how much impact our policies are having. And
so you're saying when we're able to quantify this problem, are you implying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but are you implying that if the problem is worse than we expect, then we can expect more resourcing, more funding from Auckland Council than is currently there to tackle the problem?
Well, we'd certainly be making the case to central government. Local government's never been funded to provide social housing. We do provide some housing for the elderly, minus those houses that Mayor John Banks sold off some years back. But mainly we're working in a partnership with and as an advocate with central government because they have the capital funds that enable Housing New Zealand to expand its stock.
So this homelessness count is more about sending a signal to central government as opposed to Auckland Council figuring out how big Auckland's problem is and then trying to look into ways that they can fix it, because obviously, the root causes of homelessness, like Auckland Council can't really fix. You've got things like domestic violence and addiction and all those sorts of things are hard for you guys to tackle. So is this more about, quantifying it for central government?
It's about us working with and helping central government because, central government is the agency that provides for health needs such as mental health, that provides for housing stock and so on. And it was good to see. I was there last night with Jenny Salesa, who's the MP for Manukau East and a minister. And, I've got to say that the working relationship with central government is really good, and I detect there a real commitment to do something about the problem rather than just pretending it doesn't exist.
When can we expect these figures to be out by?
I think the goal, and Housing First is managing the figures, the goal is to have those figures publicised on the International Day for Homeless, which I think is around the 10th of October. So a couple of weeks away yet.
And then is there a plan for us to do this every year, every 2 years, 3 years after that?
I think it's important that having established one benchmark, we can judge what success we've had in dealing with the problem. Now, it won't necessarily be every year, but I think every few years would be a great way of benchmarking how much progress we've made and whether we are putting an adequate amount of resourcing into trying to resolve the problem.
That's Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff talking to our reporter Zach Fleming at 18 minutes past 6. To the Philippines now, where the number of people killed by Typhoon Mangkhut is on the rise, with 69 now confirmed dead. The Philippines bore the brunt of the storm, which destroyed hundreds of homes as well as public buildings. Torrential rains also caused deadly landslides, with some people still trapped. The CBC's Sasha Petrusik reports from a village where gold miners are frantically trying to find their fellow workers.
High up on a mountain north of Manila, they dig, they scratch, they hammer. Chipping away at what used to be a village before the mud came down, before more than 60 villagers disappeared. Now, hundreds of rescuers and volunteers are spread across the mountainside. They battle exhaustion and risk new landslides to recover the bodies. Typhoon Mangkhut may be gone, but it's left a growing list of missing people and a big challenge for the searchers who plan strategy here.
We won't lose hope, no matter what, until they found the body.
Lancy Belusay's two cousins are among the missing. She sits here next to the disaster zone, next to dozens of other relatives, waiting and hoping.
It's very hard to believe, but I still believe there are survivors still alive.
Nearby, there is a shout, frantic shoveling, and another grim discovery. A body is carried away in white plastic. The people who are missing here are small-scale miners and their families, men who would literally spend their days panning for gold in the mud and dirt and in the water that comes from these mountains. The irony is that in the end, it was exactly this mud and water that turned out to be so dangerous.
There's no survivors anymore, as you can witness.
Jesus Yango is the local fire marshal. He says his men came to plead with the miners to leave before the storm.
But they insist to stay here.
So you asked them to leave, and they said, no, we want to stay.
They were directed by
They said they wanted to protect their homes from the storm and looters. It's something Patrick Alcedo understands.
So we have to stay here because this is where our livelihood is.
Alcedo's also a miner living nearby. Today, he's a volunteer in the search.
It is very hard to look for another place to stay.
Even if it's dangerous here?
Yeah, because that is life.
On the day of the storm, clinging to that livelihood also meant death, a legacy this Philippine community is now struggling to handle.
Sasha Petrusik there reporting from the Philippines in the wake of Typhoon Mangkhut. A new agency called the Office for Maori Crown Relations Te Arawhiti is to be set up to oversee the government's work with Maori as part of the Crown Maori Relations portfolio. Now, several other government units and offices are going to be consolidated into this agency, including the Crown Maori Relations Unit, the Office of Treaty Settlements, Takutai Moana Team and the Settlement Commitments Unit. The Crown Maori Relations Minister Kelvin Davis says the new agency will sit within the Justice Ministry, but its chief executive will report directly to him. An announcement on the agency was expected by some media last week, but Mr Davis told reporters that was never the intention.
No, so that was an opportunity for final submissions to be heard. So the people that were gathered there last week had participated in the engagement hui, and each had a different perspective that we thought was really interesting. So we brought them together to have a final say. They helped us to form the work that we've completed, and that was the opportunity to have a final crack at it and tell us what they thought.
So you're just saying straight, like there was no plan of an announcement that day, despite the fact the press thing said it was going to be an announcement?
Well, it was the opportunity for them to have a final say, a final submission, which we took into account, and we landed where we have today.
What does Te Puni Kōkiri think of this new agency?
Oh, they're very supportive. So Te Puni Kōkiri's role as the Ministry of Māori Development is to help develop Māori capacity, whereas we're looking at developing the capacity of the public service to better engage with Māori to realise Māori ambitions.
I understand some in TPK are not happy, though. They would have liked to have some of these functions within that agency.
Oh, well, that's a matter for TPK to deal with, but we're working with the public sector and making sure that the public sector has strengthened their capacity and their capability to deal with Māori issues is enhanced.
Kelvin Davis there is speaking to reporters at Parliament at 23 minutes past 6. Now, the Arab world isn't known for its beer, or sometimes even for allowing people to drink alcohol in public. But the residents of a village in the occupied Palestinian territories have been holding their annual beer festival. The Palestinian family, which holds the West Bank Oktoberfest, says it's a peaceful resistance to the Israeli military occupation, and they're proud their daughter is the only female brewer in the Middle East. Here's the ABC's Eric Torczyk.
This event doesn't sound like the famous Oktoberfest in Germany, even though the beer is made according to Germany's purity law. In the village of Taibe in the West Bank, there are Palestinian dancers instead of Oompa bands. Some beers even taste Palestinian, because brewer Kanan Khoury has experimented with local ingredients.
So we have anise, sage, sumac and wild za'atar, wild thyme, from the mountains in Taibe. It's a very interesting beer, very aromatic. A lot of people explain to me that it's like a Palestinian in a glass. It really does have all the unique flavors that you get from the Palestinian cooking.
Palestinian pride is the point of this unique beer festival. For Nadim Khoury, who established the Taibe brewery with his brother in 1994, brewing beer was a way of asserting Palestinian nationalism under the Israeli military occupation.
Making a beer in Palestine, it's a resisting too, because we're still under occupation. We've been in the occupation for many years, many years. And now time to celebrate freedom.
Exports from the West Bank are controlled by Israeli authorities and the movement of people by the Israeli Defense Forces. An Israeli military watchtower stands at the village junction and soldiers can set up checkpoints on the outskirts. Nadim Khoury's daughter Madis says the company has succeeded despite operating under occupation.
When the beer goes from Taibe to Israeli port, to Europe or to the US or to Japan, it goes through a lot, Even the beer gets humiliated, like Palestinian human beings, and they get to that country. And then you have the internationals who actually, drink a Taibe and they're like, what, Taibe? There's beer in Palestine?
Not only was this the first microbrewery in the region, Madis Khoury is the Middle East's first female brewer.
It's a fun job. It's challenging, especially being a woman in the beer industry, but also being a woman in the beer industry in an Arab country. So that's like double the challenge.
People come to the festival from the West Bank and abroad. Austrian nun Hildegard Ensenhofer works at a nearby nursing home and has been coming to the Oktoberfest for the last 14 years.
Very, very important, because the people here, they have not much to celebrate, This is only the weddings and events like this.
Only 1% of the Palestinian population is Christian and are allowed by their religion to drink alcohol. Yet most of this brewery's sales are in the Palestinian territories, and that part of the market is growing. It's proof that, despite the odds, you can successfully mix alcohol, politics and religion.
That's the ABC Middle East correspondent Eric Torczyk. It does seem that German beer, like German tourists, I suppose, there's nowhere in the globe they won't get to. So Palestinians, they're enjoying a little taste of Oktoberfest, possibly, what is it, it's a little bit earlier than usual. It's 27 minutes past 6. An American football player is under fire after he decided to call it quits halfway through a game. 30-year-old Vontae Davis, who plays with the Buffalo Bills, said reality had hit him fast and hard while he was out on the field. He said he meant no disrespect, but his abrupt decision did stun his teammates. The BBC's sports correspondent Richard Conway has the details.
Most people have had jobs they'd like to walk away from, but very few within sport quit mid-season or even mid-game. That, however, is exactly what Vontae Davis of the Buffalo Bills did last night. With his team trailing 28 points to 6 against the Los Angeles Chargers, Davis decided during the half-time break he'd had enough, changed his clothes and left the stadium. He later said he'd had an honest moment and told his coach he was done because he could no longer physically compete at the highest level. In a statement, Davis, who has played professionally for 10 years, said, "This isn't how I pictured retiring," before going on to outline how it's more important for me and my family to walk away healthy than to willfully embrace the warrior mentality and limp away too late. But the decision caught his teammates on the hop, with linebacker Lorenzo Alexander expressing his annoyance to sports network ESPN.
Never heard of it, never seen it, and it's just completely disrespectful to his teammates.
Did he say anything to you?
Did he say anybody did?
He didn't say nothing to nobody.
But his employer may yet have something to say. The unexpected retirement has left the question hanging of what will now happen to the player's $5 million salary.
That's Richard Conway, and that's all we have time for this evening for Checkpoint and RNZ National. For those of you tuning in and wondering about the changes that have taken place on the program since the departure of John Campbell last week, just to let you know and to introduce myself again, I'm Alex Perrottet and I've joined the Checkpoint team full-time. I'll be hosting the program until Lisa Owen joins our team later next month, and after that, of course, I'll be producing and reporting with the rest of the team, and they are all here, so don't despair. Pip, Catherine, Bridget, Zach, Logan and Calvin all remain. So thank you for joining us on your radio, your television, online, or however you choose to connect with us today. You can of course catch up on all our stories on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. Of course you can go to our Facebook page as well, which is always kept up to date by our digital producer Michelle, and all the latest information on our stories are there. So see you tomorrow. In the meantime, have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A group that campaigns against sexual denigration of children says the jailing of a former JP, Martin Henry Laws, in Auckland today shows predators come from all walks of life. The Department of Conservation says 8 cows that died after a 1080 poison drop in Waikato 2 weeks ago may have broken through a gate. NetSafe says it can do no more, and Sir Ray Avery will have to go to the District Court to get Newsroom to take down articles about LifePod fundraising. The government will look into an Oxfam claim that multinational drug corporations are avoiding paying $21 million in New Zealand taxes a year. And gang members in Whanganui are worried they'll be targets of a rival gang if they lose name suppression in court. Our next news and weather is at 7.
I saw you flash a smile, that seemed to me to say.
Paul McCartney has a new album, but